Welcome. I'm Adam Wadley, and I'm here in discussion with Rosalyn Mitchell. Rosalyn Mitchell is the publisher of Evangeline Press, an author and Christian apologist from Canada, and we're going to be discussing spirituality and world politics today. Thanks so much, Rosalyn, for joining me. I'm really happy to be talking to you.
Yes, I'm excited. Adam Wadley is a conversation partner and friend who I met at Atlanta, Georgia. You can support him on his Substack and Twitter at Experimental Unit Solution Space and listen to his radio show on public radio.
Yes, that's right. It's on WRFG radio. You can go to wrfg.org. You can see um, my stuff up there as well. But as I said, we'll be discussing, um, broadly speaking, our spiritual backgrounds and the perspectives that we bring to the big global politics. Donald Trump and Elon Musk and all this stuff that's going on. So again, I'd love to just kick it over to you, Rosalind. The first time we recorded this discussion, the didn't go well, so we're really praying and hoping for the best. But given all that, I'd love to know, what's on your mind after all that.
Yeah, so I think there's lessons here in recording multiple times. Like for me, it's trying to figure out technology and the humility to learn something new and be patient because we had really good conversations. And I wish I could have shared them with you all, but due to audio or issues with saving files, it didn't come to fruition. But I guess it's the Lord's providence that we'll try for this third time and see how it goes. I wanted to talk about the spiritual background. I was raised Protestant in the evangelical tradition, and really, since high school, university, I've always sought to go deeper into understanding my faith, looking at history, philosophy, theology, all these topics, and not just the intellect, but experiencing God, and it's drawn me to the Christian East, to Orthodoxy. And I wanted to know that I didn't last time is you shouldn't listen to a podcaster or an influencer on your religious convictions. I would suggest if you're interested in Orthodoxy to go to a local church and talk to a priest to experience it yourself. That is the best way because for me that's how God speaks is in the liturgy in community. And that is central to faith because I was raised very much Protestant with this idea that you are born again. It is very much, I guess you could say, a relationship between you and God. But we didn't really emphasize how that relates to the broader community, both the church community and then how it relates to the broader society. And this is kind of what I found very beautiful in the older traditions is having a better understanding of community as being centered around our faith.
Yes, absolutely. There's a song that I want to bring up. It's called Daydreaming by Dark, Dark, Dark. And there's a lyric from this song that just hits so hard for me, which is, oh, if you knew what it meant to me. Oh, if you knew what it meant to me. And it gets repeated, obviously, in the song. It is, anyway, more resonant. And I think that's something I'd say. For me, the desire to talk about spirituality and cosmology, I think it's something that a lot of people experience. I think in that sense, you talk about high culture and low culture and philosophy or whatever. When people see something horrible happen, they'll be like, Jesus Christ, or oh my God. When people are like think they're about to die, they will like beg God to help them, or maybe they'll ask for their mother, like. But it's like those are and so in a way it looks like the whole world's about to die or something. And so the whole world is crying out for God and crying for its mother. And so yeah, I also, as I was saying at the end of our well, actually after the conversation that didn't record, I think it's so important to think about this because to put it in a nutshell, it has to do with the quality of your intention and like what you're addressing. Like if there are people who are in power or whatever, if there are powerful people, it's like what exactly do you have to say to them? Because that's where I see limitations in some discourses. I'm not here to write off, Marxism or post-colonialism, but like setting it up as this, friend enemy distinction where it's like there are bad people and they need to be defeated. You know, um, I see too many parallels there to, the sorts of, I don't know, aggressive up to exterminationist policies that are perpetrated by colonialism and imperialism and totalitarianism themselves. Um, at the same time, I think like you have to be strong and I'm sorry for going on so long, but I do think it is so important, like basically to be saying to these powerful people, the people who are running the concentration camp or something, to be able to address them in this way with what Martin Luther King would call soul force. And it doesn't have to be any particular spiritual tradition or even you don't even have to talk about cosmology, but it's just what is the depth of your intention that you are and emotion that you are ready to bring to bear in your communication. And I think that that can actually make a big difference.
Yeah, it's kind of that interesting dynamic of like strength for power, which is a phrase that people in relation to Donald Trump talk about. Mega during the campaign is saying, "Oh, Donald Trump is a candidate for peace," and primarily looking at the recent threats, both on Canadian sovereignty, being the 51st state, or Gaza, the US occupying Gaza and allowing for the displacement, ethnic cleansing of 1.7 million Palestinians and turning of Gaza's coast into a luxury beach resort for Israeli settlers. I think that yes, you do need to have that paradox of strength and peace or seeking to still power because we're kind of losing our soul, our humanity, and um, other conversations we've had, we talked about, how we can love people, but being loving is not being a pushover, right? It's actually being firm in your convictions and speaking to these timeless traits of um, courage and being able to stand up to a bully. So it's not we're gonna threaten people in the same way that Trump does, as in we're gonna nuke those who we disagree with, but it is saying that ultimately, um, I'm gonna have a fight, I'm gonna have a spine. And this is what we see often the liberal democracy and the need to adhere and cling to social norms. It's losing that fighting instinct, that respect that people have to be firm in your convictions because it's the idea that you can't say certain things. You can't call the emperor and say he has no clothes. You always have to kind of politely in your rhetoric say, we would appreciate if Mr. Trump did not do these things. And he doesn't understand that language. Um, so in a way, you need to be as clear as him.
On the idea of Canada being the 51st state, I think it's first of all just a bit amusing because of course the land area of Canada is greater than that of the United States. So it's like you're incorporating a territory that more than doubles the it's like the Louisiana anyway. Obviously, we just live in unprecedented times. Like I would encourage people like if you're in thinking about the United States of America, like I should first of all say like another thing that I like appreciate about spirituality is a high appreciation for what you could call natural law. You could call it God's law. You could call it, there's a lot of things you could call it, basically. But it can give rise to something which is called antinomianism, which is basically where you have disdain for the law. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, the law of man. Like, oh, I'm sorry, is there something that's considered to be I'm sorry, I can get into a bit of a tizzy about that. But the pretense of the idea of the United States of America and that it is a legal entity And as I was mentioning in our last episode, the idea of the Hobbesian trap, and that even within these imperial centers, there is distrust. And so it's not, you can talk about the United States, you could talk about the CIA. It's like, yeah, what part of the CIA? But it's like, I don't know if that's important or not. Like for me, what I originally wanted to say was I was thinking about the UFO phenomenon, or what the United Unidentified Anomalous phenomenon, or whatever. Um, the question is how powerful is technology really? And what is the forefront of technology and who has access to it? Because that really dictates how aggressive people can be. Like if there's a computer that can defeat all other computers, yeah, like Blitzkrieg is going to look like a joke compared to what's coming. Like if there's people who have access to, very powerful technology and want to raise the planet, as in RAZE, right? Like they want to destroy everything to build their version of techno utopia. That anyway, I'm gonna ramble again. But where was I going with that? Basically, just I think that spirituality is a really important place to draw some gumption from, where it's like, okay, yeah, these people have all the machines, they have whatever, they're so powerful, but it's like in a way they must be foolish. Like because if you were truly wise, like you would not like your children would not be killing themselves. You would not have people like wasting away on the side of the fucking road, excuse my language. Like I really don't want to use that word here, but it's like it makes sense. Anyway, it's like there's obviously something missing. And it also seems like these people are sometimes not happy. I was also mentioning Gabor Mate talking about Donald Trump being traumatized and these sorts of politicians. And, everyone's traumatized. History's traumatizing. And, bringing a spiritual lens to that, I think is powerful.
Yeah, I think, you're talking about natural law in the beginning and how some call it God's law and how, you feel like it can lead to this idea that, oh, we're above any human law because God is telling us to do it. And I think that is kind of like a wrongly interpreted way of understanding it. It's very much this idea that I, as an individual, can interpret God's laws. But truly, I would say understanding natural law is to have it in a holistic framework of you are not the lone interpreter of God's morality. You have to understand God's morality from tradition. What have historically Christians held for 2,000 years? You have to understand it from community, from scripture, right? All these things working together because you can't solely interpret it alone. And if you look at the tradition, you can see that a lot of the empire has been ahistorical to what even Christ himself taught. For example, in the Gospels, Christ was tempted in the wilderness by Satan himself, and one of the temptations was that he was shown all the kingdoms of the world. And he rebuked Satan. He said, God alone is worthy of worship. Because Satan said, I can give you all these worldly powers, all you have to do is worship me. So, very much from that foundation, we can kind of see how it is ahistorical compared to this Trump interpretation of Protestant Christianity, which is ironic given that I don't think Trump himself is a member of a church under any senior pastoral leadership or has professed faith in a meaningful way. I would say that ultimately this is where, yes, I can understand the fears of the abuse of natural law, but I think it can be a friend ultimately to the same desires to have checks and balances on man's wildest dreams of becoming the God man. For example, the techno-fascist future of a few AI overlords developed in Silicon Valley or China or India, right? It's the fact that there's something more and you have to bow down to God and he is greater than the machine. It's like, how do you solve the machine problem? Um, Paul Kingsnorth is like a activist and environmentalist from the UK who became an Orthodox Christian. And it's like how he talks a lot about like escaping the matrix, right? This kind of almost idea of a bureaucratic techno future that we're heading towards. And that answers Christ because in our incarnation, he showed us that it's more than just the material reality that we can mold. We have to submit and we have to um, give ourselves over to Christ as the master and not the machine. Um, for myself, I think that's something that I've learned in a different way because I grew up in the tech era. And on my journey into orthodoxy, I'm still, learning so much, and I don't speak to any authority given that I'm not received into the church and I'm still under catechesis and direction and learning in the future, still an inquirer. But ultimately, it's kind of putting down those guards, that rationality, that hyper rationality of modernity, and finding Christ really. And things don't make sense, but they do when you encounter something greater than yourself. And that's for me what Christianity is.
Yeah, I'm being reminded of a line from a song. It's a love song, but it's called Smooth by Santana. Somebody else sings it. I forget what that person's name, but it's a pretty well-known song. One of the lines in the song says, "You are my reason for reason," because um, I think for me it's very important in my own recognition that the kind of people who consider themselves to be partisans of rationality, like they think that they're going to bat for rationality, they can be quite unreasonable. And that's a big part, where spirituality something has something to say, where it's like, and looking at it from the very hard-nosed idea of the science or whatever, it's like, oh, well, look at what my statistics tell me. And it's like, I didn't do very well in the program. I wound up leaving because I felt discouraged. But, I was at Duke University doing a political science degree, or like not even good. I did the first couple months of a master's program in political science. And, one of the classes that I was in was on the statistics and, to understand, and also in the other courses that I was having, the discussion was all about, what's called operationalizing your variables, right? That it's like you're trying to measure something, but you can't measure it directly. So you have to find proxies, you have to find metrics, right? That are telling you like whether, what's causing what. And of course, with political science, so much of the issue is like, are you really trying to even that's the first problem of trying to translate a messy reality basically into numbers. Like that's already a scientifically like hard thing to do. But then also the question of like, are you actually trying to like figure out what's going on, or are you trying to like make propaganda for what you wanted to do anyway, or like to like make more efficient what you already decided? Um, and so one of the reasons I really appreciate the author Ben Zweibelson, who's in the United States Space Force or the Space Command, I'm sorry. But I mean, the second chapter of his book that's coming out on March 15th, which is called Reconceptualizing War. The second chapter is all about Anatole Rappaport, who was I don't know if people might be familiar with John von Neumann, but he was, a very influential sort of scientist, you could say. I mean, he like wrote very important books on game theory, for example, with a co-author named Morgenstern. But like if you want to talk about zero-sum games, like that's so much of what we're talking about here, right? Is the idea that like people think it's win or lose and like my family's gonna die if I don't kill your family, and so sorry, I'm gonna kill your family. But it's like that's not how it is at all. We can have a positive sum game. It's interesting to me because the People's Republic of China actually uses rhetoric like this. And, if we're talking about, redeeming the world or whatever, it's interesting that China is talking about a global civilization initiative or, a shared future for mankind. I think it's important to address that because I'm not here to say, the People's Republic of China is doing a good enough job. But in terms of like addressing the way high-profile actors are discussing these ideas. Because I think it's easy to get lost in this Western ecosystem where, from the inside of Western imperialism, like it's like the Titanic is going down and nobody like understands what's happening. But from the outside, like people have been watching this disaster going on for hundreds of years, right? People have been watching this on TV. Anyway, so yeah, China, for example, and India and Iran, and obviously there's so many important countries. Everybody's important, right? But there are so many perspectives, and also, rhetorical interventions that are already being launched. And so much of what I think there is to do is to like go through, seek those out and see who's already passionate about, trying to do something which is integrative, which is, bringing people together. And, it's impossible to put into words, what love is. But if I see children in the park, I want those kids to grow up, right? I don't want them to die in some conflict because of distrust and pain and trauma and um some sense of what some people think is necessary but really isn't.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like almost an instinct that we can appeal to the good and then like miss it. For example, my attention was China and the critics of China. You, of course, know about the controversy over banning the TikTok and then Trump. It's back, but for a period, people were downloading Red Note, which is China backed. I've had neither of those. Um, so it's less so the concerns that yes, we're all having this mind virus through technology, data driven, giving our lives up to these tech overlords, and the fact that, yeah, China is competing and is likely to outpace the West. Those are all true. But it's more of my opposition to the banning of the TikTok as to the people behind the banning of the TikTok or the loudest voices, given that they tend to be, as you said, the people who are zero-sum game actors are pushing for escalation with China, primarily over Taiwan, primarily over resources like semiconductor chips, and um, don't have any ability to reflect on the imperial games, primarily as a reason to oppose. They're like, China's bad. China does internment of Uyghur Muslims. China does XYZ human rights abuses. It's the new imperialism under the Belt and Road in the African continent. And yeah, those are factually, I would agree, true statements. But you're not being honest about your role as an actor and a hegemon of US imperialism either, right? And the fact that above it all, the tech overlords, they're kind of building a society where they don't need to be aligned with either Western imperialism or Chinese imperialism because they'll benefit for this free flow of the internet, the subspace of technology, where ultimately, they can build an app, an everything app using data. Um, so primarily, we're kind of having these red herring moments when we freak out about the TikTok because we're not freaking out about how on X, for example, one can post porn and the moral degeneracy, to use that word, and impact of the mind virus on apps like Instagram. What does it teach young people that they get their value from the clicks and the likes? Nobody is being open on those issues too, right? So I think it's more of a lack in consistency that I speak to than it is a love of the algorithm. Because as Paul Kingsnorth and many Christian thinkers and prophets and saints have warned us, we need to be very weary of the machine more broadly and not just getting caught up in these imperial geopolitical games.
I had such a strong reaction to what you were saying when you were just mentioning Instagram. Like having read articles about how the suicide rate for teenage girls is like double. I mean, I haven't looked it up in the past a couple years maybe, but just it's double, it's beyond exponential. Like, and the idea that you're going to sit here and talk about China committing genocide while your daughters are killing themselves because they hate their bodies, like, make it make sense. Like, I'm not here to say that there's no issue, like, with cultural sensitivity. I don't know very much about the People's Republic of China, to be perfectly honest with you. So I'm not fit to comment too much, like in a very serious way, on the question of Uyghur. I obviously believe that people should be able to pursue and express all forms of cultural expression they want to. That are, I mean, it's I think it's impossible to really say, like, and basically in a way that doesn't harm others. I think the question of what it means to harm others is so much of what there is to talk about. But, anyways, yeah, but I just felt so powerfully about what you were saying because the issue of suicide really, in a way, it holds such a special place in my heart. And in a way, like the suicide of people who, according to, again, what we call civilization, right? People who have everything going for them, right? People who have the job, they have the partner, they have whatever, and nobody understands, right? And that's why people say it's selfish, right? And whatever. But it's like it's not just them is the thing, right? Like this happens by the thousands. Like this happens like again, and you're gonna say anyway. I get a little frustrated, but you can tell, like, I feel very emotional about that. My own cousin died from mixing opioids with alcohol, like, and we're not even really sure, like, whether what intentions he had, but he again sort of had everything going for him. His uncle was a pretty wealthy man. He worked for his uncle in some business that which I wouldn't necessarily consider the most morally upstanding, but I'm not here to judge. Um, and you know, yeah, had psychic issues as we all do, and wound up, passing away. And so like that has affected in my life as well as other family stories. Where this sort of thing comes up, and so to understand like that what we're talking about is not in the headlines, right? Like, it's at the funerals, right? It's in our hearts, right? Anyway, so yeah. Um, Yeah, just when talking about these issues, I think it's powerful to get into this like emotional space, but to be really careful not to make it too much about any one lens. About like I'm not this emotional because of capitalism or colonialism or because the people are psychopaths or whatever. There's no need to put this like big time lens on it. That's why I wouldn't even particularly do it with Christianity. I know, like, that's obviously just anyway, I'm going on for so long. But I find it, I hope that it's appreciated, that I try to put things in a not neutral way, but in a way that people who apply different lenses can feel like they can take and make their own, as opposed to feel like they need to do too much translation to like understand like what I'm meaning to say.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that idea of wanting to speak to people outside of an ideology, right? I am foremost, as you can tell, a Christian, but hearing the universal relating to the tragedy of losing anyone, your cousin, that he appeared from the outside to be functioning member of our society, and what that means is actually very sick. What it means to just be successful in our society is very distorted from being a healthy human being contextually, I would argue. But just to sit with his memory and think about who he was. Yeah.
Yeah, let me just break in. He was a pretty cool guy. He introduced me to magic cards. He played baseball, made me want to play baseball. But I also just want to say, related to spirituality, I don't know how deeply he got into sort of Eastern faiths, but he has like a picture that they made. There was artistic material sort of made around the time of his passing to commemorate him, and he's sort of standing there squatting with his hands like this, and the caption is "Got Chi." So like CHI, so kind of like energy, I don't know, spiritual energy. It could also be spelled QI again. But let me take that opportunity because there's some discussion. I think Christianity is as interesting as there's nothing more interesting than Christianity, put it that way. And I'm interested to ask you what it means to you, like about the Holy Spirit, what the Holy Spirit means to you, and like the idea that it could like flow through people or that people could be a part of it. Does that mean anything to you?
Oh, that's so the Trinity, the question of the Trinity. I feel like you can't really express that other than the mystery of that, of what it means to experience the Trinity working and flowing for you. So I'm going to leave it to mystery. And that's something that I really am drawn to in Eastern Christian expression. To know that we are limited in understanding these great mysteries, but we experience them deeply through Christ and His church. And ultimately, um, yes, I thank you for this very provoking conversation. We don't have much time left. Um, so this is Adam Wadley, a solution space and experimental unit on public radio.
Thanks, Rosalind. Yeah, let me just say one little sentence, which is related to what you were saying about mystery. I encourage people to check out a concept called negative capability. It's something that a poet named John Keats, from like an English guy, basically from like the early 1800s, was writing about, considered a romantic poet. But it's all about having tolerance and room in your in for uncertainty, mysteries, and doubts without reaching too quickly for certainty, basically. So I encourage people to check that out. I'm speaking. Thanks so much, Rosalind. Of course, people can find you at Evangeline Press on Substack, where they can reach out in case they want to collaborate. Thanks so much for talking with me.